Listen, Ted goes out of the country for 2 weeks, and we don't know how to do podcasts
Nobody knows
anymore.
what's happening. I'm like brushing my teeth this morning. It's like, are we still even actually doing this? I'm just kidding.
I'm glad you're back. I missed it. It's good to be back here talking about this again.
Yeah.
It was just 2 weeks, but I felt it.
Sorry, your fingernails. One more
Oh
time.
my gosh.
Did you get a fresh? Are they
Oh, they are
iridescent?
shimmery.
They're shimmery.
What is it? It's like
Well,
iridescent.
they're yellow, but then they're
This is
gold,
so
and then there's like
They're
like,
iridescent.
They're iridescent. Okay,
I think
that's
is
why.
the word. Yes, I went to a big
Sorry.
formal event, and the theme was reflections, and so
Ooh,
I did.
that's like commitment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's for fun. We do this big party once a year.
But like when you go to an event, you're thinking like, hey, if I'm gonna get my nails done, I'm gonna try
right.
in some way like
It's a
tie it
formal.
to
It's
things.
Theme
a
the nails
very
to
yeah.
the event.
It's so unselfish.
To my
of you.
overthinking.
Yeah. I'd be like, no, I'm just doing what I want because this is what I like. But instead, you're trying to match a theme. I respect that.
Well, I was like, how can I match the theme in a way that is me and comfortable?
Yeah. Nice.
It's complicated.
I've never had to worry about that.
I was like, I'm like, every woman's like, I know,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Okay.
All right. Ted was gone.
Yep.
Real quick, tell us something about your trip. I mean, so you went to
Went
Africa, all over Africa, and then Spain.
Yeah. I think what was really awesome was to see, because this trip was really to try and connect with some new partners, some existing partners, and just figure out some logistics and, some stuff for moving forward in future trips. And I think what was so cool was to see the level of commitment of some of these church planters that it's like, whether we're there or not, they're doing this thing.
Yeah.
And it's not that they don't need us or not that there's opportunities to come alongside them or help bolster and partner with them and doing what they're doing. But as Carl would say, they've burnt the ships. I mean, they're full in, they're committed, they're doing this. And regardless of what comes in, because they face such great adversity compared to what we do. I mean, it's crazy, but it's awesome.
Persecution
and it's
and
inspiring to
completely.
see. And just the hardships of the context and just multiple different things in different areas. So, but it was cool. It was inspiring. It was like 11 flights across. We were going like 14 days. So
Wow.
it was like
That's a lot of flights.
a lot of travel, a lot of flights.
Did you get a lot of good footage?
I did. I think I'm excited about some of the stories we're going to get to tell here in the future and hopefully inspire people to not just continue to live generously, but hopefully go and put their feet on foreign soil.
Awesome.
So, yeah, it's good.
Well, we're glad to have you back.
It's good to be back and to get back into this.
Yeah.
I was telling you guys a little bit before, like I'm reading this. I'm like, again, I either missed a bunch of stuff, so this podcast is gonna be really awesome because you guys are gonna enlighten me and school me on some things, or this is just a familiar story and the narrative of as we continue on. So
It's
No-
not
no
the Prince
pressure.
of Egypt story.
it's not. Yeah,
It's not. Yeah.
You should go and clarify that on the podcast.
that'll be the next one.
We
Yes,
do.
that's right. We're gonna get there.
We realized at the end of the last one we recorded before your trip, because we recorded a couple in advance, but as soon as the mics were off, that we messed up.
It's like wrong good
the
animated
wrong
movie.
animated movie.
And have you guys heard more? I know there was a little bit on Facebook about
Yeah.
that, but have people said anything to you about it in person?
No.
Okay.
No, only Jacob,
Only Jacob.
on Facebook. Thank
Yeah.
you, Jacob.
Everybody
for-
wanted to, though.
wanted-
They're
Yeah.
like, they don't. They're wrong.
Immediately, I think somebody else was like, "Hey, dude, I think you guys like didn't do that." I'm like, "We know,
Yeah.
we know."
It was a mistake.
All right, so let's go ahead and pick up. We're in 41. Joseph has just been thrown into prison for the whole
Down into the pit.
shenanigans with, or lack thereof, shenanigans with Potiphar's wife.
Yep.
His brothers
yeah.
and then Potiphar's wife. And he's again suffering, even though he hasn't done anything wrong.
Yeah. Oh, I guess that's true. He's in a different kind of pit. 'Cause he was
Yeah,
in
it
the pit
actually
with his
says
brother,
they're
pit-
going to say
right.
they brought him out of the pit
Yeah.
in this chapter, and it is the same phrase. His brothers put him in a pit.
Yep. What's so compelling about Joseph is even at each stage of adversity, he remains faithful. He is still living the way God wants him to, and you see the fruit of that. Like even he's a prisoner, but he's like the head prisoner.
Yeah.
And the person responsible for the prison just doesn't do anything anymore because Joseph runs everything.
Yeah.
He's
That's
such
just
a
who he
good
is.
guy.
He's very wise. He's a leader. But he also is always giving glory to God for it. I mean, every single time. It's like, well, it's not me, it's God. Oh, God did this. I mean, it's always this, am I God? No, I'm not in the place of God. Throughout this whole story, he'll say that too. So he leads, but he leads pointing to God.
Yeah.
He's one of the first characters, as we've been reading through Genesis, that you're like, oh, he's one of the first heroes of the Bible that is actually faithful.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the way through.
All the way
I'm
through.
processing what you just said.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
but it really is unique. I mean, because we talked about with Potiphar's wife, how it was really this, you see the stories in Genesis 1, this
yeah.
this echo of Genesis 1 whenever he sees her and he says, who am I to take? God's given me everything. Why would I take the one thing that's forbidden? And
Yeah.
he's sort of this new Adam, but he actually is faithful.
Yep.
And he still suffers, but we'll see what that leads to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we use the term Bible heroes. So if I don't know what your experience was with all of this, but growing up, I was taught like these heroes of the Bible, and wasn't really their failures weren't pointed out to me as a child, or maybe I just missed that. And so
Yeah.
there are all these people to aspire to be like, and you think that there's something special, and yet. If as you've read in Genesis, like one after the other, they fail, they do terrible things.
Oh, yeah.
I was at a Super Bowl party this last week, and my friend Dan was talking about like he's following along with us and reading, and that morning at church singing a song with the lyrics like he's the Lion of Judah, and he's
oh,
like
Judah.
He had the memory like, oh, Judah's not a good guy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we sing these songs with these names, and yes, it's a good thing to do that, but also there is another part to the story.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely up to this point in Genesis, and there's been some pretty like sketchy, like controversial.
Oh, it's really
things.
sketchy.
For
It's
sure.
all very bad. I'm like next week with Moses. It's
Yeah.
all like the worst parts of humanity
Yeah.
in the people that God is working through in this redemption story.
Yeah.
So that's good to bear in mind. But also we get to Joseph, and I think we'll get there in this week's podcast, next week's. But why is it here? What is it pointing to? Is he's really sort of this archetype that we'll see patterned throughout the Bible.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know. I mean, some of these chapters were long chapters, but it just really is explaining this story. And
Yep.
so I don't know what's the most helpful of like, he's there finally, like Pharaoh, and he interprets Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh
Even like think how long that took though, because I mean he's been faithful. He told the dreams correctly. He said, "Remember me,"
Yeah,
and it's
and then it was years
later. I
later.
mean,
Yeah.
and I just don't want to just gloss over that because we read through this story quickly. It's only an hour and a half movie if you haven't watched it, but it's years. Whenever he trusts God
Yeah.
and he remains faithful, even though he's in the pit, even though he's suffering, he's still. God will do this for you, and he's still wise wherever he is in his circumstances. I mean, it's pretty amazing what he's doing, not knowing God's timing.
Yeah. I think the other little bit interesting thing, just an overarching concept, is this idea of dreams and dream interpretation. And like now all of a sudden, like, is there some greater, excuse me, is there something greater here that like, okay, God gives us dreams, or he gives people the ability, at least here in their context, like, because it says they're not, what does he tell Pharaoh? He says they're gods, right? They're...
Yeah, he said
the
God will.
interpretation-
The
belongs-
interpretation,
yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
it belongs to God. It's not me.
Which is really important because understanding and interpreting dreams was something that people studied at
Yeah.
that time. Like, I'm going to study this. This is my vocation. I'm divination. But he's saying, God is going to, through me,
Yeah,
tell you what he is telling you in your dream. So he's mediating God's presence. He's representing who God is. That's one of the big themes of Joseph too, is he actually is representing God. But he's always
Yeah.
acknowledging that. He's not trying to take the position of God.
yeah,
But that was a common thing in this time, was to interpret dreams. There were people who studied it.
yeah, and the idea that Pharaoh was able to recognize. It said here in 41 through, and Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom the Spirit of God?
Lance just got really excited.
Why?
Go ahead.
What?
I feel like you were about.
There's something that I noticed this week that I've never noticed before, and it's only because I've been like working ahead a little bit, trying to wrap my mind around Exodus, knowing that that's where we're heading. And so I've been reading some things, listening to some things all about Exodus, and then also tracking with this story. And in Exodus next week, we're going to see Moses at the burning bush, and God says, I want to send you. And Moses is like, who should I tell them? And he gives the name, Yahweh. And in our translations, that anytime the Lord's name is used, it's all caps Lord, right? I think we've talked about this a little bit. In this whole story, his name is never used. Like this whole narrative, it just keeps saying God. Well, the word that actually the Hebrew word is Elohim. It's spiritual being.
Okay.
Okay? Again and again and again. So when Joseph says to Pharaoh, like, the interpretation belongs to Elohim, not to Yahweh, not to like, he's not pointing out one. He's saying like, the interpretation belongs to the Elohim, which in their world, there were lots of Elohim, lots of spiritual beings, right? And I'm still confident Joseph was connected to Yahweh, but his name is never used. And I just found that fascinating.
He leaves it up to Pharaoh to figure that out too. Yeah.
Yeah. But even it's not used until at one point at the very end of Genesis when Jacob is blessing his sons. There's something there. But like it's all just Elohim,
God.
Elohim, Elohim. And I'm thinking about
That's throughout all of Genesis?
no, it's throughout this
Well, he
this
hasn't-
narrative.
Even
this narrative.
within like the narrative. So if Moses is writing this and he's looking
right.
backwards,
Yeah.
he knows the name of God. But God doesn't reveal his name until way later than this. So anytime you actually see Yahweh or Lord, all caps, that is sort of an anachronism. It's Moses inserting that later.
Yep. And so it made me think about just like the thought that went into the writing of all this. Because again, Moses and people with him are writing to these Israelites who have been rescued out of Egypt. This is all being written, anyway.
Yeah.
It's almost like even in Genesis, setting you up for the moment where Moses is at the burning bush and you get the name Yahweh. I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot this week.
Yeah.
No.
Because God's doing all these things, but that's whenever he really,
That's right.
Makes
That's when
them
it's
his
like,
nation.
This is me.
yeah, this is me. I'm with you in this place. Yeah. We're not there yet, Lance. That's next
I know.
week.
I'm sorry, but
But I will say this is this is the first time that phrase, the Spirit of God it's in Genesis 1, and now we see it again. It's the same phrase. We see it again for the first time. So he really is this character. Oh, the Spirit of God is within him.
Yeah.
He's actually surrendering to the Spirit of God too, like he's supposed to.
Okay. So his initial dream, you're going to have to like back me up because I'm going to start kind of flying over in the
let's
story
do it.
here.
That's okay.
So, the initial dream when he told his brothers, you guys are going to be bound down to me. And ultimately that led to them like sell him off. Here he is in prison. But here now he's rising to the occasion. He interprets Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh's like, dude, yeah, you're the guy.
yep.
You're wise. You have
He
the
becomes
Spirit of
second in
God.
command,
Yeah, like
which we sort of talked about with
it's almost
Potiphar.
like first in command is what it sounds like.
But he's
Nothing
not the
happens.
king. Well, I
He's
think-
not, but he's really running the show.
He's running it.
for sure.
He is, Pharaoh gives him all the responsibility and
Significant influence.
authority
Yeah.
that is his. It
Yeah.
really, again, he's this person. You're supposed to be thinking about the image of God. Like we're supposed to reflect who God is. We're supposed to reign on his behalf. And you see Joseph doing that in the world as he should be, with wisdom, with grace that
Yeah.
leads to
And mercy. Like, okay, you're out of
Salvation and
money. Okay,
forgiveness.
sell me your livestock. Like, we'll still get you there. Or is that later?
But yeah,
I don't
second
know
in
what it is.
command,
Yeah, I
that
mean,
is
that's-
this, he's
yeah.
this vice regent.
Yeah. So his brothers finally make it there because they're looking for some food because
Yep.
famine's hit. He recognized them. They have the whole interchange. I just don't know. Like again, for me, like you said, that we were talking before the podcast. Your 4 questions.
Yeah.
I read this narrative and then I start. That was good hearing it. Like, okay, well, where's Jesus in all this?
Yeah, right.
Or what? How am I supposed to live different this week? How should I engage with my lost friends as a result of
Yeah,
this.
so we were talking before we started recording because Rachel and I had a conversation with Sherry in our office who was talking about reading through this and then like going with her small group and not knowing what are we supposed to talk about,
Yeah.
right? And what questions should I ask and how do we do this? And
Like how I feel right now on the podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I just years ago wrote this article that I've had 4 questions that I've used for the last, 12 or 13 years. As I read through scripture with my small group, I know I can always ask these 4 questions. It doesn't matter where we are. And so maybe if you're leading a small group or even thinking on your own, here's the 4 questions, very simply. Number 1, where are we? Which is all about context. The ancient world matters. You need to think about what their world was like or the type of literature you're reading, all that. So context, where are we? The second one is we say all of the Bible in some way points to Jesus or is about Jesus. So how is what we're reading, how does that fit? And that's definitely the hardest one to answer.
Yeah.
It takes a lifetime of learning how that works. The third one is how should what I read this week cause me to live differently or change my life? Like, what do I need to do differently now that I have learned something about who God is or what he wants for me in this world? And then the fourth one is, how can what I read this week help me reach my top 5? And that's just really, like, when we read the scriptures, even these narratives that are hard to know, what am I supposed to do with this? It is teaching us something about who God is. So
how we respond.
And how we respond. And so you can take like that eternal truth about God's character and think about the people in your life that are far from him that need to know he is patient and he is gracious and he hears the cries of those that are suffering. Like all the things about who he is that you read in these stories are things that your neighbors need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How we respond to suffering.
Yeah.
How we care for others. How we try to live in the Spirit of God with wisdom as his representatives in the world, that is both caring for how they eat, I mean, all of that matters, but also forgiveness and redemption. I mean, Joseph really gives us this picture of what it looks like to represent the character of God and his purposes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just in how, I think some of that is through his interactions with his brothers.
Absolutely. So I think in these chapters, and it's sort of they come and then he sends them home and then they come back and he says, bring me Benjamin.
Yeah.
Bring me the favorite child. It's the same mother, right? Benjamin and Joseph are the same mother.
Yeah.
And Benjamin's now the favorite, the one that Jacob's protecting, just like Joseph was. So if you sort of read this through all of these chapters through the lens of Joseph is testing them and he's giving them the same opportunity to do to Benjamin or to each other what they did to him.
Yeah.
Okay, if you want to sacrifice this one other brother into slavery and prison for your own benefit, do it. And he like gives them the opportunity to do that over and over again to see if they're different. Because remember, he doesn't know. Are they changed? Are they different? Do they still hate me? But I mean, he really is testing them in the same way that they harmed him.
Yep. Yeah. But then I'm trying to think of where we get to. I guess in 45, this is where it starts. I think we start getting a glimpse of really like he recognized, it's down in 45:5. He says, and now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me here before you to preserve life. And so this, like, he's recognized that really all, in spite of everything that's happened, it was all a part of God's plan to bring me here to before you to prepare a way
for others. We've said that's a lot, but when God chooses someone in the Bible and he blesses them, it is always so that they bless others. So there'll be a light to the nation, so they'll show who he is, so they'll bless others. And he's saying, this is what God's done through me.
Yeah, and then right after that in 7, and God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep you alive for you and many survivors. And so I think you start, it was kind of easy to kind of start leaning into, I've heard Carl say it a bunch. That, those who God saves, He sends, and so in this, like God's a sending God, and so where is He sending us? But clearly here He was sending Joseph ahead to make a way,
Yep.
and there's probably some pointing to Jesus
Yeah.
in some of that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I think this entire story, you can be thinking of how he is representing what it looks like to bear the image of God, to be a vice king, a regent, a vice regent, and also what it looks like to be a suffering servant. I mean, that is a large part of Joseph's story that we're going to see again, even in Israel and in all these other stories with Daniel and Esther. But ultimately, Jesus is going to fully fulfill all of these types that we see in Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And beyond just saving them like for their physical needs, this is also kind of prepping a little bit when we get into Exodus. I mean, this is how Israel, this people group ends up in that.
That's
that
exactly
place.
right. That's why so much of Genesis is the whole scroll, or in our case, the whole book is devoted to this story, because it is explaining how they got there. They've just left Egypt now,
Yeah.
hundreds of years later, but this tells the history and the story of it actually was the Lord that led them there.
Yeah.
And it was a redemption story.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was a redemption story.
And now it's the Lord who has led them out, because again they're reading back on this
And-
after being rescued.
And part of this is also so he chooses the people so that they'll be a blessing to all nations. And part of this covenant is those who bless you, I'll bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. So even just noticing the difference between what we're seeing now, how does this Pharaoh, this king, we don't even know his name, but how does he treat Joseph when he recognizes that he has the Spirit of God within him? How does he treat the people of Israel? He blesses them, and so he is blessed.
Yeah.
He's blessed a lot. That's a part of why we're seeing all that Pharaoh gets for Egypt. But then when we get to Exodus, how does that Pharaoh treat the chosen people who he recognizes are blessed? He's envious, and he
Yeah,
tries to
threatened.
harm them, and then what does God do?
Yeah.
So it's those who aren't the chosen people, they aren't necessarily condemned. It's if you're always invited into God's blessing. So just a reminder that that's a part of the story.
I loved at the end there, like after he sent him off for the last time to go get Jacob. He tells his brothers, what does he say? Then
you
he
at?
sent his brothers,
don't
sorry.
bicker?
Yeah.
Don't be
do
worried?
not quarrel on the way.
Do not
Yeah.
quarrel. Yeah.
It's like you could definitely read all right, guys, just make sure when you're on your way, stop.
Right.
Just make sure you're
Well,
not.
you know what I think that is? So if we think about the Exodus story that we're about to read, whenever Pharaoh goes, okay, go ahead, leave. And they go, and then he sends his armies to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's think about how much power that Joseph really has. For us, we know the intimate details of this like really dysfunctional family. But he really he's in command of
Yeah.
this superpower, and he says he forgives them. But you see at the end of Genesis, they're not really sure. So I think that's hey, don't be worked up. Go do what I'm saying. I'm not going to attack you.
Also, I wonder, they have to go back and tell their dad he's alive.
Yeah.
And so now they have to explain what
they
happened
did.
all those years ago.
Yeah.
Because really, if you remember the story, they just came back with a shredded coat
Yeah.
with blood on it, and kind of let Jacob come to his own conclusion, and they didn't correct him. And now,
Yeah.
I think on the way they're probably arguing
Like
or
who's
scheming.
responsible?
What are we gonna say?
What are we going to say? How are we
Yeah.
going to do this?
Reuben's
And-
like, I tried.
Yeah.
I tried to tell you.
yeah.
Well, that was the first off when he's just like, guys, I told you so.
Yep.
We shouldn't have done it.
Yep.
You
They're
even
gonna
see throughout these chapters, this is just important for like big picture story purposes. Judah, he's not the firstborn, but you see sort of Reuben and Judah go back and forth between who's trying to be the leader
Yeah.
and who's actually effective as a leader. And consistently, it is not the firstborn, it is Judah. He sort of emerges as a leader who is effective throughout these stories.
Yep.
Which, if you're reading this as the people of Israel, you know who that is. You know that he's the one who eventually is going to be the line of kings.
So Let's get to finally Jacob gets to see Joseph. Mm-hmm. Because he was basically sounds like he's dying, and then he hears this news, and he's like, "Hey, well, before I die, I want to see him. So let's go."
Yeah, and it even says that in chapter 45 that the spirit of Jacob was revived.
Yeah.
So it's like think back on his favorite wife of the four, the one he actually loved, has died. His son from that wife, and for all these years, has been dead in his own mind. And it seems to have really wrecked him. And
Yeah.
I wonder what those years were like for his sons and what they really thought of him. But I don't know, it seems like it really messed with him. But now he sees his son and he's revived. And it struck me when he meets Pharaoh and is introduced, and Pharaoh's like, how old are you? And tell me about your life. And let's see. It's in chapter 47, verse 9. Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they've not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." He's like reflecting back on his life, and like, again, he was a schemer, all these things, and he's like, my life has not been what it should have been.
Yeah.
It hasn't measured up to Isaac and to Abraham. And for me, it gives me like a peek into the window of what he thinks about himself and his own life, and just kind of some despair that he lives with.
And I think that you can see the sons feel that, because whenever we're introduced to this story, they're like, let's kill this guy, let's get rid of him. There's no question about what it's going to do to their father. And in this section, when they're sort of replaying the same story, are they going to do the same thing to Benjamin? They're very, very worried about their father.
Yep.
Their father is going to die. This is going to be their fault. I mean, you see this repentance and transformation in the brother's story too, through Joseph.
Yeah. Especially Judah offering, like, take my sons. If something happens to Benjamin.
Yeah.
He puts his own sons or his own life on the line. Yeah.
So there's this redemption of the whole people. They're all saved because they don't die. But there's the redemption of the whole family. They really are changed. I mean, think about the stories we saw in the beginning with Judah and with the two brothers who, murdered a whole nation. I mean, they're repentant, they're grieving, they protect one another. I mean, it's a transformative story for everyone.
What do you think the blessing that Jacob gives Pharaoh? Do you think that's like a different kind of blessing than the blessing he's giving his grandkid? Like,
yes, I do.
So what are the different kinds of blessings?
No, you go.
Or
No,
like,
you-
why
you
is
spoke
it?
first.
No, you do. No, you do. No, you do.
Rachel's
No,
going
it's
to
just-
Twirly, guys.
Well, I mean, it's not the covenant blessing. Whenever he blesses his children and he's blessing them, may God do this, and it's also God's covenant blessing that he's giving to the seed. I mean, that's the promise that he first gave Abraham. When he's blessing Pharaoh, that is part of the covenant. It's the outworking of the covenant. Who I will bless you, and then you will bless all the nations. And it's just this picture of that. I mean, that is the point. And I know I keep saying it, but it really is. And we should remember that.
Yeah, and I think in this moment, he's grateful to Pharaoh for recognizing in Joseph this character and this leadership and this wisdom. And again, God says, I will bless those who bless you. And so Pharaoh, in a sense, has blessed Joseph. And this is just Jacob recognizing that you have been good to my son, to my family. And now, like, because of all this, a nation is okay in the midst of famine.
Yeah.
And so it's a recognition
It's
of it.
this picture of what God's intentions are. It's I want everyone to flourish, to be blessed, to live life with peace with one another, with reconciliation, with forgiveness, who are bearing my image. That's what you're getting in this little tiny story. This is what it could look like. Because we've seen over and over what it shouldn't look like. It's envy, it's distrust, it's grasping at power for themselves. And this is what it looks like whenever you have a leader who surrenders to God, who has radical faith in God, and God uses to redeem and bless everyone around him.
Yeah.
I also imagine in that moment, Pharaoh, who's powerful, he's a king, and then now this old man is standing before him saying some weird stuff, probably,
Yeah.
and there's an interpreter between the two translating. And
The shepherd.
I just imagine like Pharaoh, in a sense, being gracious to this old guy, just like letting him do his thing.
Yeah.
And everybody's looking around, like wondering what's Pharaoh thinking? What's he going to do? But he just
And it's this juxtaposition between this Pharaoh
Oh, yeah.
and the next Pharaoh.
Oh, yeah.
So Jacob, he recognizes that God is with him, and then that is not what we're going to see immediately after.
All right, so this week we wrap up with ultimately after that exchange, Pharaoh's like, "Yeah, dude, take your family,
Yep.
go. You got this place over here. Go do your deal."
Yeah.
And they kind of become, because of Joseph's position and excuse me, I guess all their dealings, they're fruitful and start multiplying.
They leave Canaan,
Yeah.
the land that was promised to Abraham and his descendants. They leave that because of the famine. They end up in Egypt and are treated well.
Yeah.
Everyone from the family in the part of the clan, they move and they're under Joseph's protection. It's not even protection as much as it's like Joseph is a hero in Egypt.
Yeah.
So his family is certainly welcome.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at now, into 47.
This is the origin story of Israel,
Yep.
which we keep saying, but I mean that this is their story, and this is why they ended up in Egypt. Why are we here? Well, it's because God was protecting and blessing us.
Yep.
But then every time, even we've seen this in Genesis, God protects, he blesses, these horrible things happen like a flood and, a drought and famine, but God saves a remnant, and through his people, he rescues and he's faithful to his covenant. But then the next chapter is always some sort of failure of humans, which that's what happens
It's
next.
about to happen
Yep.
next. You're like quickly jotting something down.
I am. It's for the next one.
Okay.
Like it's notes. You're saying stuff, and it just like is triggering things we need to talk about in the next podcast.
All right.
Sorry.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a good segue. I think we're done here for this week, and it sounds like next week hopefully is going to be a good one. And so be sure to tune in. Anything else for the greater good, or you guys?
Nope, that's good.
I felt like you were about to say something.
I just, the question of how does this point to Jesus, sometimes that is hard. And I think we said yesterday, it takes practice. It takes a long time of what is the story? What is, Jesus' place in it? But this story really points so directly to Jesus. He is the very image of God who suffers at the hands of those who are evil and opposed to God and jealous of his power, and yet he does so with complete and radical surrender and trust to his Father. And then in doing that, he's the suffering servant who brings redemption and salvation to the whole world. So you can just see already here, right? This was written a long time before even anyone was thinking about a Messiah or what that looks like. And you see Jesus' story right here. So I just think it's a beautiful picture of what we see Jesus do for the whole world later.
Well, thank you for listening to the Bible Reading Recap Podcast. Remember, as we read and reflect on God's Word together, we're growing in our commitment to be a people of hope with our one heart fully surrendered to Jesus. You can subscribe to receive additional resources to help you study the story of Scripture at clearcreekresources.org. We'll see you next week.